All right. Well, I believe we are now streaming. Good evening and welcome to tonight's Massachusetts Attorney General Climate Debate. My name is Sabrina Shankman and I will be moderating the debate tonight. I report on climate change at the Boston Globe. And while this event has a series of sponsors, all of the questions were written and selected by me. Speaking of those sponsors, I'd like to give a quick shout out to the groups behind tonight's event, which is brought to you by 350 Mass in partnership with Canton Residents for a Sustainable, Equitable Future, No Fracked Gas in Mass, Berkshire Environmental Action Team, Brookhaven Residents Climate Change Committee, Massachusetts Climate Action Network, Fairmont Indigo CDC Collaborative, The Enviro Show, the Mass Renews Alliance Coalition, Our Revolution Massachusetts, and the Mass Power Forward Coalition, which includes the Sierra Club and the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition. That was a bit of a mouthful, but I believe they will also all be posted in the chat. But thank you all. So we're joined tonight by the three Democratic candidates for Attorney General. We've got Andrea Campbell, Quentin Palfrey, and Shannon Liz Reardon. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and I understand the Republican candidate, James McMahon, was invited as well. I am delighted to be spending the next hour with you hearing about how, if elected, you would be addressing climate issues. You will notice there's a screen on here that says Massachusetts Attorney General Climate Debate, which looks very innocuous right now, but it will be transformed into a timer. We're going to be following a strict schedule tonight, and I've got it on good authority that the event organizers will be merciless with the mute button. So we're hoping to keep everyone to the time limits, and then we can keep things moving. And I'll make sure to come back to everyone. The first set of questions will have 3-minute responses, and then later we'll have a rapid fire set with 1-minute responses, and we'll close things up with a 2-minute closing statements from all of you. Hopefully your campaigns have let you know about this plan. If a candidate's name is invoked in an answer, then I'll come back to you and you'll get 30 seconds to respond. So with that, let's dive in. First question. As Massachusetts works toward its legally binding target of slashing emissions to 50% of 1990 levels by 2030 and hitting net zero emissions by 2050, there is a lot of work to be done. According to the state, we'll need about between 750,000 and 1 million EVs on the road and 1 million heat pumps in homes by the end of the decade, goals we are falling short on currently. How do you envision the role of the Attorney General in achieving the state's targets? And what are some specific ways you might intervene to ensure the state gets on track? We're going to take this first one alphabetically. So Andrea, you first, then Quentin, then Shannon. You each get 3 minutes.
Thank you, Sabrina. And let me make sure I can see the timer, which is somewhere. I see it. First of all, I want to thank all the organizers, but I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, frankly, the horrific shooting yesterday in Texas. I think all of us are affected by that. I know tonight we'll be talking about issues related to climate and the environment, but I think it's really important, given the current epidemic of gun violence in this country, to just acknowledge and lift up those families in that community. So just really wanted to start there. It's just really important. I will say, there's a whole bunch of things to do. One, I want to, of course, give credit to our current Attorney General, who's really has been doing the work, along with Rebecca Tepper, who leads that bureau, and so many others in the office, to make sure that we are, of course, keeping pace and hopefully catching up to meet those requirements. I think, one, I've been stressing this. I think it absolutely involves engaging certain communities that are often not included in this conversation. And that includes communities of color. I live in Mattapan in Boston. We deal with heat issues, all kinds of air pollution, noise pollution, other issues as well, rural communities as well. I was recently in Chicopee, or recently, just earlier today in Chicopee in the western part of the state. If these communities are not a part of the conversation and really engaged in terms of how they need to change their own infrastructure in their homes and have the resources to do that, it's going to be really difficult for us to meet those requirements. And I'm proud of the work Mothers Out Front, obviously the Environmental League, and many others are doing with respect to addressing this issue. I think municipalities have to step up, whether it's their buildings themselves or obviously anything dealing with their cars or fleets, electrifying those. I used to be on the city council in Boston. Clearly, there's some great work happening under our new mayor, but there's more to do across the state. And I think the AG has a responsibility to coordinate some of that work in response from our municipalities, and also pushing the state. And that means state agencies. The MBTA and many others are really a part of the problem, and be really frank that they are not necessarily working as hard as they should to help us meet these guidelines and of course meet these goals with their infrastructure. A lot of promises are made, but then of course they're not kept. The AG has a critical role to push state agencies as well to do better and to comply. The resources, I think, are there, particularly with funding coming from the federal government and infrastructure bill, but I can't stress that engagement piece. And I'm really proud to have the endorsement of Senator Markey in this race, the Environmental League, the Action Fund of the Environmental League, of course, and so many others, because they not only see me as a candidate that can bring more people to the conversation, but also see me as someone who'd be bold and courageous, continuing the leadership of our current AG, that incredible national reputation that we have in terms of these goals and meeting them and exceeding them.
Thanks very much. All right, Quentin, over to you. Same question.
Thanks so much, Sabrina. Thanks to the organizers. Thanks, Andrea and Shannon. Really looking forward to this conversation. If you read that IPCC report, it's crystal clear that what we do now or fail to do will determine what kind of a life our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren face. And the international community is not acting with anywhere near the level of urgency that's required. Congress is blocking meaningful change. The Baker administration has failed to lead. And so if you think about where the leadership is going to come from to take on this crisis with the urgency it deserves, it's going to come from the grassroots. It's going to come from state leaders like the AG and the governor, and it's going to come from regional collaboratives. I had the great honor to serve in the White House under President Obama, and most recently in the Biden-Harris administration starting on day one. And I'd like to model my approach to this crisis within the AG office on something that Biden and Harris did on day one, which was issue an executive order. In our case, it would be a memorandum instructing every part of the government to take on the climate crisis with urgency. And I'm a former assistant attorney general. I've seen how vast the AG's responsibilities are and how broad they are. And the reason I think that that model of saying that everyone across the office needs to take on this issue with urgency is that you can't silo it to the Environmental Protection Division. It has a wonderful legacy, suing ExxonMobil, the Massachusetts versus EPA case, leading in the fight against Trump administration that was reckless in its disregard to this crisis. We need to do that enforcement work, both on the civil and on the criminal side, but we need to bring urgency to the other aspects of our work. We need to work, use our levers over the energy and utility sectors to drive urgently towards a clean energy revolution, fight against new fossil fuel infrastructure, dismantle the fossil fuel infrastructure that we have, and really rapidly decarbonize our buildings, our transportation sector, and our power plants. As Andrea mentioned, she's absolutely right. The climate crisis hits communities of color the worst. And we need the Civil Rights Division, the entire office, to take on those civil rights issues and the environmental issues, environmental justice issues as civil rights crises. When we are advising state agencies and defending the actions of state agencies, we need to have a view of the Commonwealth's best interests that is a long-term view. And then we need to work with the legislature to push towards good policies for clean energy and for a carbon tax. We need to stand there with a bullhorn in our hand, protesting Holtec and the Weymouth compressor station, the peaker plant, the machine gun range on Cape Cod, and so many other things I hope we'll get into tonight.
Yes, we definitely will. All right, thanks. Shannon.
All right, thank you, Sabrina. Thank you so much for Mass 350 organizing this forum, and I want to thank my fellow candidates in joining me in this forum. I called for this forum about a month ago because I think it is important that the voters of Massachusetts hear from each of the AG candidates specifically what our plans are for how we're going to tackle climate change. This is an issue that's far too important to be left to a soundbite as one of many issues in this campaign. So I'm very happy that we're going to be having this conversation tonight. So my plan as your next Attorney General is to continue doing what I've been doing for the last 23 years of my career, and that is holding corporations accountable. I have spent 23 years fighting the biggest, most powerful interests, taking them to court, and recovering hundreds of millions of dollars that I've put back in the pockets of working people. And I have made corporations change their policies, and I have changed industries. Nowhere do we have a bigger fight on our hand than the challenge that faces us to meet our climate change goals. And one thing that I have learned from my career is that getting the right laws on the books is just the first step. The legislature has now put forth this next generation roadmap, which sets important goals, but laws do not enforce themselves. We need an experienced, seasoned attorney at the helm of the Attorney General's office to make sure that these laws live up to their promise. I will be an active participant with the legislature, a partner with the legislature, to make sure that we go further. I think that we need to electrify our commuter rail system. We need to invest in further public transportation. We need to invest in West-East rail. We need to have fare free transit to encourage people to be using public transportation. I plan to engage not only in aggressive enforcement using the full power of the AG's office and its criminal powers to ensure that corporations don't continue to get to profit off of climate change. I am the candidate who is most ready to step into Maura Healey's shoes and take on and continue the important fight she's been fighting against Exxon, which the office won an extremely important decision just yesterday in the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. That litigation is going to be able to continue now, and I look forward to leading the AG's office and continuing it. My plan is to be a leading attorney general, leading attorneys general offices across the country to make sure that Massachusetts is a leader and a trendsetter in fighting climate change. In so doing, we must have all players at the table, marginalized communities I've spoken for through my whole career, as well as making sure that corporate America doesn't use our transition as an excuse to take away good paying jobs.
All right, right down to the wire on that, Shannon. Very impressive. All right. Well, thank you for all that. So some of you touched on the Exxon case. I'm curious, when we think about turn the scope from Massachusetts to the national stage, what pending or under discussion national lawsuits that you see that are related to climate that you think deserve the attention and resources of the Massachusetts Attorney General? And again, if you can be specific, that's helpful. For this one, Quentin, you'll go first, then Shannon, then Andrea.
All right, so the question is, what is the role of the Attorney General on the national level? What are the cases at the national level that the AG needs to take on with urgency? I mean, look, the way that I think about this is that the Attorney General is absolutely a litigator and needs to lead on the kinds of litigation that Shannon just mentioned relating to ExxonMobil. I think this is an extremely important case. I think that they committed or are likely to have committed fraud, and the ability of the AG to bring that case forward is really important for taking and leading on accountability. But our role is much, much broader than just leading on litigation. We need to be playing a much more active role at the local level in pushing back against clean energy or fossil fuel infrastructure. So we need to be fighting against the peaker plant in Peabody. We need to be fighting against the Weymouth compressor station and pipelines in Springfield and all across the Commonwealth. So I would like to actually see our gaze be a lot more local in most of this work. We need to make sure that the DPU is truly independent of the utility sector and that we are pushing for a future of our grid that is decarbonized and that relies on renewable sources of energy. I would also like to see us use the bully pulpit of the Attorney General's office much more aggressively to push for urgent climate action. So one obvious way to do that is to interact with the legislature to try to get over the finish line the strongest possible clean energy bill that will help us to meet the aggressive goals that you laid out, Sabrina, that we absolutely need to hit. But I also think that the AG should be out there literally bullhorn in hand against some of the worst environmental polluters, using every lever at our disposal to bring urgency to that fight. I also think that we should have the backs of municipalities that are trying to be at the forefront of this conversation. So when the Brookline town leadership tries to make it necessary for us to have entirely renewable sources of energy in new building construction, we should find every way to push forward with that municipal innovation. So I don't mean to step away from the national stage. I led in the Attorney General's office multi-state actions against insurance companies. That is a very important set of tools that the AG needs to take on. But I do think that a lot of the focus of our climate action and urgency needs to be focused on what's happening right here in Massachusetts and how we can move urgently towards a clean energy economy right here at home.
Okay. Shannon, same question to you. And the question is, what pending or under discussion national lawsuits related to climate do you think currently deserve the attention and resources of the Massachusetts Attorney General?
Right. Well, thank you, Sabrina. So I was going to answer your question, which is about litigation. And this is what I've been doing successfully for the last 23 years. I've been widely recognized as one of the top plaintiffs' lawyers in the country. So I am very excited about putting my skills and experience to work to fight climate change and take on bad corporate actors the way I've been taking on bad corporate actors successfully throughout my career. My work has changed industries. I've moved the trucking industry, the janitorial industry, the gig economy, and now I'm looking forward to stepping up as Massachusetts' next Attorney General and taking on these corporations who have been profiting off of fossil fuels and causing devastation to our environment for so many years. So this Exxon case that Maura Healey's office has brought forward that now has passed this important hurdle by winning this important decision yesterday with the SJC, this is a landmark case that is going to make Exxon pay for the devastation that it has caused. And you know what? Exxon is not the only corporation out there that has profited off of fossil fuels. There are a whole lot more out there. That case is now going to be in discovery through 2024. And I'm looking forward to being the Attorney General leading the fight to make Exxon have to pay for the damage that it's caused. And I want to take penalties that we would recover from that and other litigation and set up a green bank to fund environmental justice projects as well as invest in clean energy. And I also want to talk about some other litigation out there like you asked about. There's a particular case I'd like to highlight, Juliana versus United States, which is a landmark case that was brought by 21 young people in 2015 against the federal government using a creative and novel theory called the public trust doctrine, in which essentially these young people argue that the government's actions, affirmative actions, have been responsible for climate change. What I have relished doing throughout my career is taking big ideas and making something happen from them in courts. I have relished using creative, out-of-the-box thinking and making big, powerful players who have their corporate representatives stand up against an even playing field with me representing the most marginalized communities. So I'm looking forward to doing that as Attorney General. And as I said, I have experience leading teams of lawyers in impact litigation across the country. I've coordinated with Attorney General's offices here in Massachusetts and elsewhere, California, New York. This is not just a local or statewide issue. It's not even a national issue. It's a global issue. And I look forward to being the country's leading Attorney General, leading the fight in our courts to combat climate change.
Thanks. Andrea, same question over to you.
Thank you, Sabrina. So I do think obviously there's a role for our office to continue to play at the national level when it comes to issues related to environmental justice and climate. This is actually one issue and set of issues that we do have a national reputation. As I talk to and blessed to talk to either other AGs in other states or staffers in other states, what our current AG in the office is known for is the work in the climate context and the opioid crisis. So if anything, it's a continuation of that leadership. I actually think it's an opportunity to broaden our scope when we're talking about, for example, reproductive health care and those rights being rolled back or taken away by the Supreme Court. Of course, there'll be other possible concerns of other environmental wins that are under threat by the Supreme Court, but we're not there yet. And so I think it's important to maintain a sense of hope, especially given what happened yesterday. We're blessed that we have allies in the federal administration, including an ally who used to work in the AG's office in the Environmental Bureau. So we're lucky that we have allies at the federal level and the national level, but it is going to come down to the states. Everyone is stressing that. And what makes this state so great is that not only the work and leadership of so many activists and allies and incredible organizations for generations have been doing the work, pushing for this new roadmap legislation, all the pieces are there. The question is, are we going to be fierce and bold in our enforcement and protecting our residents? Weymouth, Braintree, they want us, of course, to stand up for them in the context of the compressor station. Out in Western Mass, I've been in Berkshire County more than once. They want us to continue to go after GE with respect to what is being thrown, the PCBs being thrown in their river. Ipswich, they want us to work with them to make sure that their river actually isn't endangered anymore. And so there's a lot of local issues that we can be fighting for. In addition to that, I keep stressing communities of color, rural communities of color. I live in Mattapan. There are many places, of course, across the state. I was in Green Roots and Chelsea as a part of our Gateway Cities listening tour. They're doing remarkable work to advance environmental justice. And what are they talking about? The expansion of green parks, the expansion, of course, of a tree canopy to help with those issues. Noise pollution. I don't think anyone's really doing a great job on addressing that issue, which is critical. I served on the city council for 6 years. Fireworks and other things, there are more and more reports to talk about the devastating effect those issues have on communities of color in urban centers. In addition to that, air pollution. We don't need another report on that and the connection to high asthma rates and other public health concerns and the death of so many residents. If anything, it is greater enforcement using the laws and regulations that are on the books and being bold and courageous and going after the bad actors. PFAS, another example, really proud to see the announcement of our current AG. So that ExxonMobil case is great precedent for us to use to go after other bad actors that will help everybody across the state.
All right. We have one final question with the 3-minute responses. And for this one, Shannon, will have you go first, followed by Andrea and then Quentin. Some of you have touched on this a little bit, but when it comes to entities like the Department of Public Utilities and ISO New England, which make these key energy decisions, but have not historically done so with climate in the forefront of their mind, I'm curious, how do you imagine engaging with them as Attorney General, and what are some specific issues you see taking up? And I'm particularly interested in, like, there are some growing pains that are happening and that have to happen between now and 2030, 2050. And what is the role? Like, how do you get in there? What do you see for your role in that?
Yeah, so I think the big issue that we're all reeling from is the recognition that these corporations that have profited off of fossil fuels have been allowed to start writing the rules themselves for what our future looks like. There needs to be better oversight and assurance that all stakeholders are at the table as we are making these very important decisions about what our future economy is going to look like as we transition to a green future. Having gas companies write their own rules about what that future looks like is just not going to get us to where we need to be with our goals. It would just be like Uber and Lyft getting to write the rules about what the future of the gig economy would look like. That makes so little sense. We need to have impacted communities at the table. As Attorney General, I will be sure that marginalized communities, who I have been standing up for and fighting for and winning for my whole career, are right there in the decision-making process as we're figuring out what this future looks like. And I will also make sure that we are taking care of not just the people of tomorrow, but people today. As Attorney General, I will not let corporate America use our transition to a green economy to be an excuse to take away good paying jobs with union protections and good benefits. We need to make sure that we are doing everything in our power to ensure that those workers who are being impacted by this transition are getting job training and the availability and the ability to get into these clean energy jobs, of which there will be so many of them. We need to take creative steps, for instance, requiring that corporations that are getting public funding or assistance in transitioning to green technologies use project labor agreements to make sure that we are assuring good paying jobs and benefits for those workers who are impacted by the changes that are coming. We need to take creative measures like the Green Bank that I've been talking about to see to it that we have additional funding available to invest in these new technologies. You know, whenever a technology is a new one, it starts out being very expensive and looking cost prohibitive. But just in the last few years, the cost of solar has plummeted as that technology has developed more. We need to be investing in geothermal so that its cost will go down. We need to be investing in wind. We need to be taking all action that we can to be able to move our electrical grid to real renewable energy sources. And that transition is going to take a lot of work that will require all stakeholders to come together to be on the same page about what needs to happen to save our planet.
Thanks, Andrea. Over to you.
So the DPU, it's significant. One thing that I have actually really enjoyed about this campaign so far is not just, of course, crisscrossing the state and meeting with residents, but really learning from folks on the ground how difficult it is to really participate and engage with a critical entity on issues related to climate and the environment. So I was in Chelsea, I mentioned Chelsea and Green Roots and the incredible work they're doing. And we were talking about a hearing where residents showed up to, I think it was oppose something that was going to be coming to their community. And there was no translation services. Folks took time off of work to show up and to participate and engage. They were almost treated like they were invisible and they weren't there. It was difficult, it was challenging, and as you can imagine, upsetting, because these are folks who are engaged, who are about the work. Other organizations, Mothers Out Front, there's so many that are doing the work, showing up and pushing the envelope in terms of advocacy on what we can do to reach these goals. This is where the AG absolutely has to step up, and we've been using it as an example. When people say, well, who is the AG and what does that office do? Well, let me tell you, it's significant for many reasons. But if you do not have an AG, you're not able to participate in a DPU proceeding as a lay resident. There is fierce and bold power in being an AG in that office and making sure that our residents' voices are heard and are advocated for in the issues they care about, and that the DPU, of course, reaches and really meets the spirit and intent of the new roadmap legislation and that statutory directive, which they're currently not doing. And so what can the AG do? I think it's significant given the power as a state's attorney and so many other pieces, so much other credibility that the office has to push for utility companies to step up, to not accept that they cannot meet these requirements. One thing about the DPU proceedings, as well as the ExxonMobil case, I think they go hand in hand, is that it really provides us with an opportunity to really push these companies to reveal their books, their economic business plans. How are you going to adjust your strategy, your business plan to really comply? And not just say you're going to do it, really speak to how you're going to do it on a paper. I think that's, of course, a space and a place where the AG's advocacy is deeply needed. Oversight, absolutely needed. Implementation in the appointment process as well related to the DPU, critically important. And then take it on the road. Of course, we're talking about it here, but the average person doesn't know who the AG or the AG's office, what the AG's office does. They definitely don't know DPU. And so connect it to their bills. Make them understand that as we transition to clean energy, if you're not a part of this conversation, you will be left out, left behind, and it will affect your family's bottom line and your family's budget. So take this conversation on the road to engage them too.
Okay, thanks. All right, Quentin.
So I think one of the biggest impediments to urgent action in the transition to a clean energy economy right now is that the DPU is too cozy with the industries that it regulates. And what that means is then the DPU and frankly, the Attorney General's office are not doing enough to hold the energy sector and the utility sector's feet to the fire to decarbonize, to dismantle existing fossil fuel infrastructure, and to not build new fossil fuel infrastructure. So a couple of times we've mentioned this roadmap that DPU gave the pen to the sector that it regulates. And of course, the future that they envision is not anywhere near as robust a clean energy future as we need. So we need the Attorney General's office to be free of that kind of agency capture, to really stand up for consumers and for the environment, for climate action against an industry that has been too tied to the government entities that it regulates. We've been talking a lot in this campaign about the People's Pledge and about the importance of keeping corporate money and outside money out of this election. One of the reasons why that is so important is because you need the AG to stand up and push back against agency capture. And we've seen that kind of an agency capture really have a detrimental impact in the utility sector with the DPU. In terms of the Attorney General's actual role, I think we need, in order to meet those climate goals, and by the way, those climate goals are not aggressive enough, right? We need to be much more urgent in the way that we respond to this climate crisis. We're nowhere near on track to meet those goals, but those goals are not strong enough. We need to be a partner to the governor and the legislature in doing several things, right? One is that we need to decarbonize the transportation sector. We need to electrify everything. We need to move towards renewable energy sources in terms of our power production, our energy production, and then we need to do a lot more about buildings. And so the AG can be a really important partner in all three of those goals. And we have a lot of levers. One of the things that I learned from being an assistant attorney general is how many places where the Attorney General touches this system. So the AG is involved not only in interacting with the utility sector, but in many ways in regulating some of those prices. And these are public utilities. And so the AG has a role in making sure that they are serving in the public interest. So I think we ought to be a much more vigorous watchdog to this sector and be really skeptical of the corporate influence on government decision-making.
All right. Well, so we're going to transition at this point to our rapid fire questions. You'll be getting a minute to respond to each of these. I may have lost track of where we are. I think Quentin, Andrea's first at this point. I think you're going to go first.
I've lost track too, so.
Yeah. Well, we're just mixing it up. All right. So for the first question, as we look to the rapid expansion of the electric grid to support the transition to clean energy, there's going to need to be a lot more electric infrastructure. What is the role of the Attorney General in protecting marginalized communities and ensuring that this transition is an equitable one, especially when it comes to the decision-making around the siting of those locations?
It's critical, and I know we only have 1 minute. It's critical, and obviously there is a decision or a litigation pending right now with the SJC about this. I think the office currently is taking a balanced approach, which is to say you can't have a moratorium on new infrastructure that will help us get there and move away from gas and move to clean energy. But how do we make sure that every resident, of course, has an opportunity to participate in those conversations, to share with an AG's office and many others, of course, what they want to see, where it should go in their community. But every community is going to have to step up. And that's not just true in the context of climate and the environment. That's true for housing, the opioid crisis, of course, drug abuse, mental health, you name it. Most of the issues we are dealing with are statewide or regional at the least. And so it's really incumbent upon all of us to recognize there's a role that each of us have to play, and it can't continue, of course, to be on the backs of environmentally just communities.
And over to you.
We know from experience that communities of color are most strongly hit by the climate crisis. There's going to need to be investment in mitigation, most in those communities, but a lot of this comes down to political power. Things that pollute have a tendency to be cited in the places where the residents have the least political power to push back. We see racial disparities across the public health system, particularly around asthma and also diabetes and other kinds of challenges. That relates often to air pollution. We see noise pollution, as Andrea mentioned. A lot of this returns, though, to the question of political power. So I think with the AG, as the people's lawyer and as the chief civil rights officer in the Commonwealth, needs to stand up for those communities in all of those decision-making processes and make sure that we are pushing for environmental justice everywhere that it comes up, often in municipal conversations.
All right. Shannon?
Standing up for marginalized communities against powerful interests is what I've been doing through my whole career. I have been delivering results for communities of color, for people of color in the workplace and our educational system. And as Attorney General, I am going to stand up for those marginalized communities in these critical decisions that are going to be made about how we're going to make this transition in our electrical grid. The textbook definition of environmental justice is ensuring that there is meaningful participation by impacted communities in these decisions. We've seen what has happened with the Weymouth compressor station, the Peabody Peaker, when communities were not consulted and allowed to have a say in these projects taking place, impacting their families. As Attorney General, I will ensure that all voices are heard and that the impacts on the surrounding communities in these critical siting decisions are taken into account and that all voices are at the table as we're making these critical decisions.
Okay, thanks. Next question. The clean energy transition is going to see a birth of a new offshore wind industry in Massachusetts, and most likely the extreme decline of the gas industry. How will you, as Attorney General, work to ensure a just transition that protects the skills and incomes of gas workers to make this equitable? Quentin, we'll start off with you, then Shannon, then Andrea.
So thanks for that question. So first of all, we need that decline in the gas sector to be rapid. And we need the acceleration of wind power, solar, geothermal, truly renewable sources of energy to be equally rapid. But there's a real economic opportunity here. I worked in the White House under President Barack Obama as senior advisor for jobs and competitiveness. And one of the things that we were working towards was the jobs and industries of the future. And the jobs and industries of the future are based on this clean energy revolution. These are going to be good, family-sustaining jobs if we can compete to build these industries and sectors rapidly. And we're competing against China. So we can do really well by doing good in this sector. Of course, we need to protect the communities that are going to be most harmed by that, workers, and the state needs to step up to cushion that blow. But we need to build the jobs and industries of the future because that's going to be really good for our economy as well as our environment.
Okay. Shannon?
There is no shortage of jobs that will be required to ensure we make this transition that we need to make to green, clean energy. But as I said before, it is critical that we do not let corporate America use this transition as an excuse to take away good paying, union protected jobs with good benefits. And as Attorney General, I will take every step possible, use the bully pulpit of the office, use my active participation with the legislature to make sure that we are providing workforce training for those individuals who are whose jobs are displaced, that we are requiring corporations that are making this transition to these green energy technologies to be putting in place project labor agreements and other mechanisms to ensure that these are good paying jobs. It's imperative that we that we provide the training for workers and that we don't allow this industry to be appified, which I could talk much more about if we had more than a minute.
All right, I know a minute is hard. All right, Andrea.
Thank you, Sabrina, for the question, but also the framing. Normally it comes up in a different context, right, of how we're going to get away from gas and how households and families do that. there's a ton of jobs. I think that's actually one piece that we should be taking on the road as we look to engage more folks in this conversation. This conversation around climate justice, environmental justice, protecting our planet is not just a moral question. It's not just a health one. It's not just about the next generation or children. It is about economics. It's about jobs. And sustainable and good paying jobs. And I think if you are going into communities, there are ways in which, of course, to work with, whether it's higher ed institutions, companies, unions, so many others to ensure folks have the adequate skills to transfer those to other jobs. I like to think we can be creative on certain types of priorities to help folks so no one is losing their job. And then go a step further. Folks who are unemployed and looking for a new opportunity also go into those communities to have these conversations as well, which I think is a positive one and one that could bring people together.
So thank you for that. And moving on, so there's a money problem when it comes to climate change. This all costs a lot of money, whether it's helping people put heat pumps in their homes, incentivizing getting people into electric vehicles, getting all the chargers that we need. There are all these money issues. And earlier, or rather late last year, we saw the dissolution of the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which was expected to be a great source of funding. I'm curious what you imagine, how do we fund this? Where does the money come from in the great climate transition that's needed? We are at Shannon starting off.
All right, well, one great way to start is to get the fair share initiative passed this year, which will provide crucial ongoing funding for our transportation system. Another way is to look for creative methods of finding the funding to invest in clean energy projects. And the Green Bank that I've been talking about is a very important piece of that. What better use of the penalties that we will collect from taking on Exxon for lying to us about climate change and other fossil fuel corporations who have done the same thing. I want to take those penalties and use those to set up a fund to fund these types of initiatives. There is a lot of possibility out there. I would love to see Exxon and other like-minded corporations have to pay for much of this. And I will be an active partner with the legislature to make sure that we are prioritizing getting to where we need to be, because it's going to take a huge investment to get there. And it's critical that we do so.
All right, Andrea?
I used to always say to my constituents who lived in Dorchester and Mattapan, which most know is one of the poorest districts in the city of Boston, there's always money. We live in a very wealthy country. The question is intentionality. The question is taking bold and courageous steps to make sure those resources are directed to the issues we say we want to solve and eradicate. So I think it's really looking at where do we spend our money now in terms of our state budgets, et cetera. I think the ExxonMobil case and other types of cases that are generating settlement dollars for the AG's office, incredible flexibility to use those resources to establish a fund, for example, for those pumps for households that can't afford it. So there's so many creative ways to do this. Infrastructure, we're about to get $9.5 billion from the infrastructure bill from the federal government. Last I checked, that's a lot of money to do some really remarkable things. We have a large philanthropic community. The ecosystem in Massachusetts is incredible. We have all the tools to do it here, and I think to lead the way, including from off-wind and other industries as well.
All right, thanks, Quentin.
So I agree with the thoughtful answers from Shannon and Andrea. I mean, the Fair Share Amendment is obviously something we should do to ask the folks at the top to spend a little more so we can invest in rebuilding our transportation sector. I'm a big fan of the carbon tax. I think that we ought to put more money on the table in that way. We ought to incentivize the sets of things that we care about. We ought to design our economy so that we incentivize transit and dense housing near transit, so that we disincentivize single-use cars and all of the things that are going to burn fossil fuels. But at the end of the day, it's very, very expensive not to solve these problems. This is a crisis that is going to have devastating economic consequences. And a rapid transition to a clean energy economy is going to build whole new industries. So from an economic perspective, the clean energy answer is also the economically sound answer to this set of challenges.
All right, great. since you guys have not been naming each other and requiring rebuttals, we have time for one extra rapid question in here. So 2 more questions to go. So it has been presented to us that running for office is essentially like an interview. And since we are interviewing you all, wondering if you might be able to cite what in your background specifically makes you qualified to address climate change as Attorney General. So climate change and the law and your work. Specific examples would be appreciated. We are at Andrea. Can you start it off?
Thank you for the question. And I mentioned earlier that I was honored to have the support of the Environmental League Action Fund, Senator Markey, and so many other electeds, frankly, who care deeply about environmental justice and climate justice. And why are they supporting me in this race? It's one, because I see the issues as intersectional. I will tell you, we're on here talking about climate, of course, but that for me also connects to the epidemic in mental health, the epidemic in gun violence. If you are living in a community that is not safe, that is under threat, and these are some threats, there is, of course, significant work that has to be done. I served on the city council for 6 years, doing the work of pulling in communities that are not a part of these conversations in a meaningful way to be a part of them, asking them what they cared about, planting trees in public housing spaces, doing the work, of course, to support bold legislation at the city level to reduce our carbon footprint, so much work, and that won't change, but doing it with an intersectional lens and bringing in more people, because if we don't, we will fail in this movement.
Quentin?
So I have great respect for the wonderful experience of my friends Shannon and Andrea, but I believe that my experience as a former Assistant Attorney General, as the chief of the healthcare division, my experience in the Biden administration, where I led a team of several hundred lawyers and took on all of the litigation that the Trump administration handed to the Biden administration around the census. Some of the work that I did in the White House around the future of work and building the jobs and industries of the future. Some of the work I did in the Biden administration, helping to launch the Build Back Better agenda, which, as you know, contained a lot of investments that were meant to usher in a clean energy transition. I believe that those experiences put me in the best position to lead in this office on day one. As a former Assistant Attorney General, I know how to use the levers of the office to be effective on the really big challenges like climate crisis, like the climate crisis.
All right, Shannon.
Sabrina, I think your question was, what specific legal experience do we have that enables us to lead the people's law firm? I am the most experienced lawyer in this race. I have been taking on the most powerful corporations for more than 23 years and holding them accountable. Companies like FedEx, Starbucks, Uber, Amazon, IBM. I have changed their behavior. I have recovered hundreds of millions of dollars for people from these corporations. I have won 7 landmark rulings from the Massachusetts SJC. I have led teams of lawyers across the country in taking on global actors who have impacted workers, consumers, and now I'm ready to do that for our environment. This is a job for a seasoned, experienced lawyer to lead the people's law firm, not a politician. And that is what I am. I am one of the most successful plaintiffs lawyers in the country, and I look forward to serving the people of Massachusetts as your next Attorney General.
All right, thanks. And for our final question tonight, what is one climate-related decision that was made by Attorney General Maura Healey that you would have done differently? And how would you have handled it? Bonus points if you don't repeat what another person says. All right. Shannon, you are up first for this, and then Andrea, and then Quentin.
All right. Well, I have to say Maura Healey has been a terrific Attorney General, and I am very excited about the opportunity to step into her shoes and continue on with this very important work that she has been doing. I think that there are some cases that could have been brought sooner. I'm excited about the work that she's done against Exxon, and as I've talked about, I'm looking forward to continuing on with that important litigation. I think there are other corporations that are just as liable for lying to us about climate change and profiting off of spewing fossil fuels into our environment. So I'm excited about taking the helm, leading attorney general offices across the country and continuing with that work, and taking on other bad actors and using creative methods to do so, the out of the box tactics that I've used throughout my career to get to really big results.
All right, Andrea.
I too want to applaud our current AG we have a national reputation of doing incredible work, her and her team. I do think PFAS obviously came out today. I think there were a lot of residents. I was talking to some folks recently in Holbrook. You can't drink the water in your home, who wanted to see some of that legislation happen sooner. But it's here, which is exciting. But I asked our current AG before I jumped into this race, I didn't jump into it lightly. What are the areas and where does the office need to go? And one topic of discussion was our gateway communities. We may actually probably need to call them center cities, not gateway cities, because they're doing so much to advance economic opportunity. New Bedford is one example of that in terms of off-wind and what they're creating in terms of industry and innovation. But I've been going into our gateway communities or our center cities. And I think there needs to be more intentionality on affirmative policies to help these communities. If we're doing asthma, addressing asthma in Springfield, how do we do that in other communities? If we're in Chelsea looking to expand access to green space, how do we do that in other communities? So I think there's an opportunity here.
Okay. And Quentin, over to you. And just a reminder, the question is, what's something that you would have done differently than Attorney General Maura Healey? What's one decision you would have done differently?
Yeah, so I think Maura Healey's been a terrific attorney general. I had the honor to serve alongside her. I was the chief of the healthcare division when she was the chief of the civil rights division. We worked together very closely. I think there are a lot of things that we need to take on with more urgency, and a lot of them are these local issues. I think we ought to protest against Holtec dumping radioactive water into the Cape Cod Bay. We got to protest against this Joint Base Cape Cod trying to put a machine gun range where it's going to pollute the water. We got to protest against the Weymouth compressor station, the peaker facility, the pipeline in Springfield. I think that we ought to be much more aggressive in pushing back against the agency capture in the DPU and be much more urgent in pushing towards a clean energy transition, decarbonization. So I would like to see a lot more activity at the local level and the AG be more involved. I mentioned also with respect to Brookline, I would like to have their backs. I'd like to push urgently and more impatiently for actions here in Massachusetts.
All right, thank you. All right, so at this point, we're going to transition to our closing statements. You'll each have 2 minutes to make a closing statement. Andrea, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you very much. And thank you again to all the organizers for doing this and for the work you do every single day. I obviously jumped into this race really recognizing that families are struggling, and they are struggling with climate and environmental justice issues, even if they don't know they are. And most of our communities are not very safe and ready and prepared to be resilient for the next generation. And I have been out there stressing what this office can do with a very intersectional lens to help a family. And of course, that may mean a family of one or a family of 25. And what makes me, I think, unique in this race is my legal experience. I often get, I think, maybe referred to as the politician in this race. I'm more than that. I do have a legislative record, and I'm proud of that. I'm the only candidate in this race that's gone into the State House and worked with, including Governor Baker, across the aisle to get things done, and with many others to move the needle on critical and pressing legislation. I did it also as an attorney for Governor Deval Patrick. That won't change. But I have the most comprehensive legal background in this entire field. I started my career representing the most vulnerable, our children. And as we talk about climate issues, which of course are important, I would be remiss again if we did not acknowledge that we are in an epidemic of gun violence in this country, an epidemic when it comes to mental health. And I think my skill set is unique in that I've directly represented children. My youngest client was 6, my oldest was 22. I also worked in state government, including working with the AG's office as an attorney for Governor Deval Patrick, pushing, of course, to address a whole bunch of issues across the state. I worked as a regional planning agency, at a regional planning agency as a general counsel, always looking to do issues through a regional lens. And the lived experience, or my life story, is unique and it's different. It's a lot of pain and loss, but it connects to many residents who are struggling. And I think uniquely makes me qualified to also help them bring them into this conversation, which I can't say enough. If they are not at the table, good luck, right? Trying to advance the initiatives we need in order to save our planet and of course, protect the next generation. So thank you all for having me. Hope to earn your support.
Thanks, Andrea. All right, Quentin.
Thanks so much for having us. Thanks for pulling together this important conversation. Thanks to my fellow candidates. So I'm a proud candidate for Attorney General because as a former Assistant Attorney General, I've seen firsthand how much impact the people's lawyer can have on the really critical challenges that we face right now in Massachusetts, in this country, and in the world. When Trump was in office, it was really inspiring to see the AG fight back again and again and again against the Trump administration, and climate was a really good example of that. But now more than ever, with our fundamental rights under attack in the Supreme Court, with our democracy under attack, I do think that the AG needs to take on the really big challenges. And those are intersectional, as we've talked about here today. The climate crisis is at the center of that, but we also need to take on racial injustice. We need to take on attacks on our democracy. We need to protect workers and protect reproductive rights and LGBTQ rights. We need to take on student loan debt and face off against this devastating gun violence. And thank you, Andrea, for raising that up. As a father, I'm just devastated today. The AG can play a really big role in this. I was the first chief of the healthcare division in the AG's office. Healthcare has a lot to do with the climate crisis because, as we know, it has a devastating impact on public health. I would like to move towards a single payer system. I'd like to move towards a Green New Deal so that we can invest in prevention of the climate crisis, but also prevention of a number of the things that flow from that. When I was in the White House under President Barack Obama, my boss was John Holdren, the president's science advisor, and he used to say there are three things that you can think of with the climate crisis. There's prevention, there's pain, there's mitigation, and there's pain. And what you can control is the ratio of those three. We need to urgently take advantage of this window of time to focus on prevention because the pain is coming.
All right, thank you. Shannon.
Thank you, Sabrina. So this job as Attorney General, it's a serious, important job for a lawyer. I am the most qualified candidate in this race to take on the role that Maura Healey has been performing. You've heard me talk tonight about my experience. You've heard the other candidates talk about their experience. I would ask you, the voters, please put our resumes side by side and look at every legal job we have each had and for how long, and decide for yourself, who do you want to hire to be the next lawyer for the people of Massachusetts? And I'll tell you an important distinction that hasn't come up tonight. I have pledged that I will refuse fossil fuel money in this race. Andrea Campbell has not. However, when she was a candidate for mayor last year, she did say she would reject contributions from fossil fuel executives and lobbyists. While I'm troubled that Andrea has flip-flopped on this issue and now will willingly accept fossil fuel contributions, I am more disturbed by the fact that during her race for mayor, she broke her pledge and did in fact accept money from fossil fuel lobbyists, including lobbyists for the Koch brothers. Consistency is important. Being straight with voters is important on a number of issues now, from charter schools to safe consumption sites and now fossil fuel money. Andrea Campbell has been on all sides of these questions. As candidate for Attorney General and as your next Attorney General, you won't have to worry about me accepting money from those who are on the Koch brothers payroll. I won't do it. And you also don't have to worry about me flip-flopping on my core values or them changing depending on the dynamics of the campaign. I won't do that either. I have spent my career standing up for the most marginalized, taking on the most powerful interests in this country and winning. And that is what I will do for you, the voters of Massachusetts. Thank you, Mass 350, for holding this debate. And thank you for all those who've tuned in. I look forward to serving the people of Massachusetts as your next Attorney General. Thank you.
All right, and before we end things, I'd like to give Andrea a 30-second rebuttal.
I just will say this. It's unfortunate and disappointing that my opponent continues to attack me and sort of make it personal, even suggesting in a recent forum that I didn't care about lives outside of the city of Boston, which is absurd. Residents right now don't want us attacking each other, particularly those who say we are proud Democrats and who have done the work. They want us to focus on the issues and what we will do to help them with the struggles they have every single day. And what happened yesterday clearly reminds us we have work to do. So I tell my team, don't get distracted by the noise, do the work, focus on the people. That's what we're going to do. And I was in Chicopee earlier today, going to keep getting out there. Thank you.
All right. Well, I just want to note that there have been some really great questions that have come in on the chat tonight. I don't know if the candidates, if you all have had a chance to take a look at them, but I think these are all things that people are really curious about. I'm sorry, only that we just didn't have time to get to all of them, but hopefully you've gotten a chance to take a look. I just want to say thank you again to each of you for joining tonight and for your thoughtful answers. And thanks for everyone who tuned in. Just end on this note to say that in my work as a climate reporter, people often ask me what they can do to help the climate crisis because it's pretty overwhelming. And there's a really long list of things that we can all do to get off of fossil fuels. But the most significant thing is also the easiest, and it's free. And that's voting. So I hope everybody does that. All right,
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, Sabrina. Good night, everybody.